Hey guys, I wanted to give you a little information about Unit 7, which we are going to just cover a few pieces regarding um, Islamic art that I think are important. We're not going to be covering Buddhism and Hinduism, which is a shame because I love them. But there's some underlying themes that are going to kind of continue through these Islamic pieces that we're going to be looking at. And I think it's important to understand what was going on in the world contextually. Okay, understand that word contextually. Um, so that you get a picture and an idea of why these pieces were important. So here we go. I'm going to read through this piece and kind of discuss a lot of the pieces. But the arts of West and Central Asia play a key role in the history of world art. It shows us that many cultural exchanges that have occurred in these lands that link European and Asian peoples. So what does that mean? Well, we have to remember that this is when the Silk Road is really happening. So you can see by the chart at the bottom, people are starting to trade. And with that becomes the development and the sharing of a lot of ideas and techniques architecturally and artistically. Okay. So we're looking right now at kind of Central Asia and Inner Asia. So there's boundaries that have shifted politically throughout history. So there's different areas that have obviously been called different things, and they have changed their rulership over time. But they ultimately form the heart of the ancient Silk Route that connected the Greco-Roman world with China and India. And so these were important trade routes where things and ideas were constantly shared. The arts show the influence and sharing of cultural ideas between the ancient Mediterranean, medieval Europe, Southeast and Southeast Asian countries. Okay, especially with the spread of Buddhism and Islam. So the spread of Buddhism and Islam really did also evolve in this Silk Route. The areas shared ideas like cultural art forms, Hellenistic architecture, Buddhist sculpture, Persian art, ceramic tile decoration. But the area's dominant religion and culture is Islam, okay, which is represented through their arts of the time. Many examples of Islamic art from across the tradition of Islamic lands share similarities in terms of their content and visual characteristics. We've talked a little bit about the visual characteristics that we acquired during Islamic art and how that they are not figurative. They're purely vegetal and full of patterning, okay, geometric patterns, vegetal, and calligraphy. Okay, those are the three main pieces that you're going to see occurring within Islamic art. We also talked about how, because they don't use figuratives to show who Muhammad is or Allah, because in the Quran there is no physical description of these people, so they can't be signified as human form. So most of the art was created for local and global patrons, obviously wealthy royal people, and for religious purposes, like many of the arts that we talk about throughout art history. The arts had an international impact on trade, textiles, especially um, different types of um, carpets were vastly traded on that Silk Route, aka silk stuff. Also, ceramics. I make myself laugh. The religious arts of Western and Central Asia are united by the traditions of the region, Buddhism and Islam. So, cultures of these regions are very diverse, but they were united through their shared beliefs and practices, particularly through Buddhism and Islam. So Buddhism originated in the 6th century BCE in South Asia and Islam in the 7th century in West Asia. Okay. So architecturally in West and Central Asia, it's frequently religious in function. So there's many important mosques decorated with non-figural imagery that we just talked about, including calligraphy and vegetal forms. So here you can see an idea of how calligraphy is used. And when we think of vegetal forms, we think of flowers, vines, um, different kind of floral and leaf-like patterns. Okay. All mosques have a Qibla wall, which faces the direction of Mecca. Mecca is the most important site in all of Islam. Okay, so it's the home of the Kaaba. We're going to be talking about the Kaaba and what that is. But when you think of the old traditional words that, well, at least when I was growing up, people would say, "This is my Mecca," um, or "Which direction is Mecca?" So Qibla walls would always are always facing the direction of wherever Mecca is from that specific location. Okay, so you're always in Islam, no matter where you are across the world, you are always praying towards Mecca. Okay, which inclusively is where the Kaaba is. And that's the most sacred and religious piece of art and architecture to the Islamic people. Okay, so the Qibla wall is ornamented with empty mihrab niches, serving as a focus of prayer. So what we see here in this picture are different mihrab niches. So and how they're decorated. That would be kind of the focal point of all prayer. Okay. So you have to think of when people are praying in Mecca, they usually get down on their knees and they bow down on their carpets towards Mecca. So that directional piece, the Qibla wall, is always going to show you which direction to pray in. A larger mosque may also include a minbar, which is a pulpit. You can see that on the right-hand side. That's where people would preach, basically, as well as a minaret and a central courtyard to call and accommodate practitioners for prayer. So the minarets we would see as little focal points, especially around the Hagia Sophia that we talked about. The minarets would be where people would walk up there and they would sing or call people to different prayer times throughout the day, okay, to signify that it was time to pray. So here are other important forms of Islamic religious architecture, including commemorative monuments such as the Kaaba down here in the lower left-hand corner. Right here we see, oops, I need a pen. My pen. Here we see the Kaaba, okay, and that's where many people go to pilgrimage for the Islamic. So once in a lifetime, as per one of the rules of Islam, is you have to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. And this is where people pilgrimage to. All the little tiny people around it, you can see there's a certain way that you go about your pilgrimage, and we'll talk about that with the Kaaba. And you can see this down here is the Dome of the Rock, okay, which again is a very important structure in Jerusalem for the Islamic people, okay. Central Asia is further recognized for its outstanding Buddhist cave architecture, which incorporates relief carving, constructive sculpture, and wall painting. So these are some examples of Buddhist relief carving, usually up against a wall, giant Buddhas. And again, people would go to make pilgrimages to these sites to pray and offer gifts to the Buddhas. In Tibetan lands, Buddhist architecture flourishes in the form of stupas and monastic architecture. So here we have an example of what stupas are. These are different stupas. They kind of come up to a point. Oh, that's a terrible drawing. Okay. This would be an example of a stupa. The stupa is the oldest Buddhist religious monument. And in prehistoric times, stupas were simply mounds of earth and stones, places to bury important kings away from the village. Stupas evolved from being used as shrines to the dead and into places to honor the living. They were erected to remind people far into the future that they, while living, had the seed of enlightenment. A stupa is intended to stop you in your tracks. It's an architectural representation of the entire Buddhist path. The body, speech, and mind of an enlightened teacher is contained therein, a reminder of a timeless quality which one senses in old monuments. The Tibetan word for stupa is kotin, meaning receptacle for offerings and implying support for lay people to express devotion and connection to a Buddha mind. Pilgrimage is an important religious practice in Islam and Buddhism, and the key focus of several monuments and artworks in West and Central Asia. So that's going to be contextually why they are super important, is that they offer a pilgrimage site to people. So they include the Kaaba, which of course we see here, the most sacred site in Islam, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem in the center, and the Buddha sculpture in Jowo and Poche, considered the most sacred image in Tibet. Okay. So why do you go on a pilgrimage? Why is it important in Islam and Buddhism? So Islam, the pilgrimage is to Mecca. It's a once in a lifetime obligation for those who have physical and financial ability to undertake the journey. The Hajj, which is what it's called, your actual pilgrimage is called the Hajj, is essentially a reenactment of the rituals of the great prophets and teachers of faith. Pilgrims symbolically relive the experience of exile and atonement undergone by Adam and Eve after they were expelled from heaven. Wandering the earth, met again, and sought forgiveness in the valley of Mecca. They also retrace the frantic footsteps of the wife of Abraham, Hagar, as she ran between the hills of Safa and Marwa, searching for water for her thirsty baby, which according to Muslim tradition, God answered with the well of Zamzam. Lastly, the pilgrims also commemorate the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice his son for the sake of God. God later substituted a ram in place for his son. So we're not going to go over the Buddha stuff, but it's really important to look at the pilgrimage site for Mecca and the Hajj. It's a really important thing for people to do, okay? Buddhism, again, really quickly, we can think of meditation as an important practice in Buddhism, okay? The whole idea of Buddhism is you're reaching spiritual awakening, and that you reach a higher level of consciousness when you meditate. And so that's what the great Buddha did. And it's kind of the goal of a lot of Buddhists. So really quickly, the use of figural art in religious context varies among traditions. We're specifically looking at Islam for this, okay? But we also get mandalas, which is a spiritual and ritual symbol in Indian religions, which is a very important part of the Buddhist religion. Islamic art that's created for religious purposes does not contain figural imagery. Mosque architecture is decorated with non-figural imagery, including calligraphy, geometric patterns, and vegetal forms, as we talked about previously. Manuscripts or objects containing sacred text may contain calligraphy, illumination, or geometric and vegetal decoration, but should not contain figural imagery. Figural art is an important subject of Islamic art in Western and Central Asia. They draw a clear distinction between sacred and secular context, and figural imagery abounds in secular works, okay, such as decorative arts and manuscripts. So you can actually have a work of art like this, the Bahram Gur Fights the Card, and the Court of Gamar's folio. And there are images actually of figural people because they're telling a story. They're not specifically religious in their context, which makes it okay when you're talking about Islamic pieces. There tends to be two-dimensional designs. And again, figural works only really are for non-religious things, telling stories. So ceramic arts are also an important part, like tiles on the sides of mosques and architecture, and metalwork flourished as well. Carpets, silk carpets for, again, geometric patternings, and many different types of art pieces like calligraphy. Okay, the first piece we're going to start with is the Kaaba.